Chapter 1. Henry Crider sat in his living room, staring despondently at his feet. Now that he'd lost his brother, he felt like he had no one left. His brother, James, and his sister-in-law, Bobby, had died in a boating accident, leaving him with their 2 young children. He was thankful he'd offered to keep his nieces that day, so they hadn't been lost as well. Of course, now he had to figure out what to do with them. Abigail and Avery were the sweetest children he knew, but they were still so young. At 4, the twins were a handful, and he had no idea what he should be doing with them. What did he know about raising small children? The only answer he could come up with was marrying someone who could be a mother to them, but he wasn't dating anyone. He couldn't just flip through the yellow pages and find a bride, as much as he wished he could. As soon as the thought crossed his mind, he walked to his computer and Googled matchmakers. Everything else was on the internet, why not that? He was amazed at the number of people offering their services, and the cost of said services. He owned his own business, constructing custom homes, but he was far from wealthy. Scrolling through the pages of ads, he became more and more amazed at what people were willing to pay for a good matchmaker. Maybe he should just search for a nanny service, but really, he didn't want to have a live-in nanny as a single man. He was a Christian and believed in waiting until marriage for sex. No way would he invite an uncomfortable situation. Finally, after scrolling through 4 pages of matchmaking services, he found the one he was looking for. Matchrimony. As he read through the fine print, he grinned. You will not be allowed to meet your potential mate until you are at the altar. Yes, that would suit him just fine. Asterisk. Samara Royal picked up the phone to call another client for Dr. Lachele Simpson. Her job as the good doctor's assistant required her to make follow-up phone calls, as well as doing anything else Dr. Lachele needed done. It wasn't uncommon for her to have dinner with Lachele and her husband, Sam, or even just spend her days off shopping with her employer. She loved her job, and she loved her life. She just wished she had someone to share it with. One of the occupational hazards of working for a successful matchmaker was feeling lonely after every new match, and after every wedding. She'd been toying with the idea of approaching Lachele for her own match for a while, and she realized it was finally time. She was usually such an upbeat person, but she was feeling down. It was going to start affecting her job performance if she wasn't careful. She'd been thrilled to spend time in Wisconsin for Sissy's wedding to Bob, but it was her turn. Putting the phone down, she decided the call could wait, but she couldn't. Dr. Lachele was between her counsel and clients. It was time. Samara didn't bother to knock on Lachele's door, knowing her boss didn't stand on any kind of formality when she wasn't in session. Lachele? What's going on, Samara? Did you get those calls made? Lachele slipped her glasses off and laid them on the table, immediately making the transformation from working professional to friend in Samara's eyes. Samara shook her head, plopping down into the seat across from Lachele. No. I didn't. I want you to find me a match. There was no reason to beat around the bush. She always felt like Dr. Lachele could read her mind anyway. Lachele's face lit up. I have someone picked out for you already. I was about to approach you about him. You'll be so happy. But, you haven't interviewed me or put me through the psychological testing. Good gravy, girl, I know you like I know myself. You don't think I can pick a man for you? Samara grinned. Oh, I know you can. I just figured you'd make me go through what everyone else does. And he's willing to relocate to New York? Or he's already here? Lachele shook her head. No, he's not. You'll need to go to him. You'll travel for work some, but most of what you do for me can be done telecommuting. I can't make you coffee from another state. What do you think interns are for? Besides, if I can't make a good cup of coffee at my age, I don't deserve to have any. Samara smiled. So where are you sending me off to? Lachele smiled. We'll fly out together, and you'll see once we get to the airport. How does 2 weeks from now sound? Samara's jaw dropped. You seriously expect me to be ready to marry in 2 weeks? Well, more like 15 days. We'll plan it for 2 weeks from tomorrow. I'll call him now. Lachele waited for Samara to leave her office, and when Samara didn't, she made a shooing action with her hand. Go on. I need to let your groom know when we're coming. Samara got up and walked from Lachele's office in a daze. She'd expected to have months to think about it, but Lachele never did anything halfway. She should have known. Asterisk. 2 weeks later, Samara taped up the last box. Lachele would ship all her things to her on Monday morning, after she'd arrived back in Manhattan from the wedding. Her small apartment was bare. There were boxes everywhere, a suitcase by the front door, and her wedding dress hanging on a hook. That was all she could see. She sighed. All of her pots and pans were packed, and now she was hungry. I need to eat, she said to herself, walking to the phone. She dialed a number, waiting for it to be picked up. Sammy Sunflower. I was just going to call you to insist we go get something to eat. Are you hungry? Starving, and I've packed up my kitchen. Well, let's go eat then. Sam is out of town on business this week, so it's just you and me. Why don't we meet at that little Irish pub on Broadway that we both like so much? Samara asked. She was hungry, but she needed the celebratory atmosphere that she knew the pub would provide. She was getting more nervous with every passing day. As she walked to the pub, she watched everyone around her. Would the man she married be like the one in front of her, holding hands with his girl, or like the one who was walking toward them, his arm wrapped protectively around a girl's shoulders? Would he be sweet or gruff? She had no idea. She knew she should quit worrying and wait to see, but it was hard. How could she trust someone else to find the ideal man for her? Why had she thought this was a good idea? By the time Samara stepped into the pub, Lachele was waiting for her at a small table in the corner. She slipped into the seat across the table from her boss. Tell me about him. The wait is killing me. Lachele laughed and shook her head. You know as well as I do that I don't work that way. At least tell me what state I'm moving to. That's not too much information, is it? Lachele sighed. I won't tell you the exact state, but I will tell you, it's in the Midwest. Samara frowned. She wanted the exact state, of course, but she'd gotten more than she'd expected from her employer on the subject. It's cold in the Midwest. It can be. It's cold in New York too, though, so don't whine about it. Just marry the freak. He's a freak? Why would I want to marry a freak? Lachele grinned. When you meet him, you'll understand why I chose him for you. Oh, Sammy, you are going to be the happiest woman alive. That great, is he? I'm getting nervous about meeting him. The way you make him sound, I'll never be good enough. Good gravy, Samara, you know I don't make bad matches. Trust me. Samara sighed, leaning back in her chair. Fine. I'll trust you. Don't make me regret it. Lachele laughed. So you trust me as an employer and not as a matchmaker? Very sad, Sammy. Very, very sad. Samara groaned. I trust you. It's hard to trust someone else when your heart is on the line. What if I meet this man you found for me and don't like him at all? You'll love him. I've listened to you talk about your perfect man for months. You don't think I pay attention to you? I met this man, spent 10 minutes with him, and knew he was your dream man. It took me many hours more to be certain you were his dream woman. But you're sure? Lachele sighed. For the 50th time, I'm sure. I couldn't be more sure. She shook her head. I should have had Sissy and Cindy fly out here to take your mind off things. Why didn't you? Samara had been a little hurt that her Wisconsin friends weren't there to help them prepare for her wedding day. They'll be at the wedding. I didn't think they should have to travel all the way to Manhattan for tonight and then back to the Midwest for tomorrow afternoon. Are you serious? They're really going to be there? Lachele nodded. I was going to surprise you, but you seem so upset tonight, I figured I should tell you. Why are you upset tonight? I don't know. It just feels so weird to be leaving everything I know and everyone I love to marry a random stranger who lives in the Midwest. I don't even know what state I'm going to live in. Lachele simply grinned. Just breathe. A couple of hours later, Lachele walked Samara home. Are you all packed? Yes, but it doesn't seem real. Are you sure I'm doing this? Lachele shook her head at Samara. What you need is a good booby bump. I do. Samara hugged Lachele tightly. I'm scared. Lachele smiled. Of course you are. You'd be stupid not to be, and you're anything but dumb. She raised her hand to hail a taxi. I'll see you tomorrow. I'm going to grab a taxi and be here about 10. We'll go to JFK together. Samara nodded. She'd rather go to the airport with Lachele as long as the older woman wasn't driving. That will help. A little. She unlocked the front door of her apartment building with a wave. Her last night as a single woman. Who'd have thought it would come so soon? Asterisk. Henry paced back and forth in the back of the church. He'd left the children with their weekday caregiver, hating it. He wanted them with him, but he didn't know how his future bride would feel about having two young children running around the church before their wedding. Betty was as close to a grandmother as the two would ever have, but they were still his responsibility. If James and Bobby had wanted them to live with Betty, their will would have had her name in it and not his. They'd be at the reception though. He knew the bride's room was occupied by his future bride, and though he wanted to know what she was like, he didn't feel compelled to go sneak a peek at her. Whatever she looked like was fine as long as she was a strong Christian woman, willing to help him raise the twins the way they should be raised. Nothing else about her mattered. He didn't expect to have some great love with the woman, just a helper for the twins. If they were attracted to each other eventually, that would be a plus. He didn't really have time for a family and marriage, which was why he'd wanted a nanny so badly. The wife was more for financial reasons than anything else. She could work from Kansas, according to Dr. Simpson, which would work well for him. He didn't know what it was the mystery woman did, but he'd thank God every day for her ability to move to him. He sat down, entirely alone in the groom's room. 4 months ago, his brother would have sat in the chair opposite him, giving him advice about how to treat a woman. Of course, if his brother was sitting in that chair opposite him, he certainly wouldn't be getting married. There was a knock on the door, and he called out, "Come in." Lachele Simpson herself, purple hair and all, walked into the room and took a seat. You ready for this? She asked. He shrugged. I think so. I cleaned out half my drawers and 3/4 of my closet. I even built a rack for shoes, so she can have as many as she wants. She chuckled. I was thinking more mentally ready than physically, but I may need to see that shoe rack. He smiled. I just hope she likes shoes. Of course, she likes shoes. I'm not matching you up with an insane woman. Lachele shook her head. How are those beautiful twins of yours? His heart warmed at the mention of Abigail and Avery. They're doing well. Still wake up in the night crying for my brother and his wife at times, but I think that's to be expected. There'd be something wrong with them if they didn't. Will they be here today? I haven't gotten to meet them yet. They'll be at the reception, but not the wedding. I didn't think we should be inflicting small children on an entire congregation of people. Lachele chuckled. Probably not. Your bride could handle it though. You're going to be thoroughly amazed with her. He shrugged. I'm just hoping she'll be a good mother for my girls. She will. The best. Asterisk. After Lachele left her alone in the bride's room, Samara started pacing. Suddenly she thought this was the dumbest thing she'd ever done, and she needed to get back to Manhattan immediately. She was in Kansas of all places. Wheat fields and more wheat fields. What kind of crazy person chose to live in Kansas? The door burst open and Sissy and Cindy came flying at her. Someone needs a booby bump, Sissy yelled. Samara grabbed them both, hugging them tightly in turn. How did you two get away from your businesses? Sissy shrugged. My dad took over. Deputy Bob had to stay and keep cheese curds safe for humanity, though. Trey is watching the band B for me. He didn't want to, but he knows we can't just close down for the weekend, and that I wouldn't give up a weekend with Sissy to come to your wedding, Cindy responded. Samara laughed. You two are a sight for sore eyes. I was just starting to freak out about marrying a total stranger in a few minutes. Give me advice. She sat down, pulling her long dress around her legs to keep it out of the way. The other two collapsed into chairs opposite her. Sissy spoke first. Well, I don't think there's any way he could have rigged the marriage like Bob did, so just jump his bones and get it over with. You'll both feel better afterward. Cindy elbowed Sissy. Jump his bones gently. Men tend to get scared when women are too aggressive. Well, Trey did anyway. What about getting along? You guys didn't have problems getting along? They didn't leave dirty socks in the kitchen or anything? Cindy laughed. Oh, they have their little things that drive us crazy. Sissy's lucky, though, because Bob loves to cook. She only has to cook for work. Trey is feeding everyone donuts for breakfast this weekend. We'll see if I get any complaints. I tried to teach him to make scrambled eggs, but the fire alarm upsets the guests. I told her to have my dad deliver cheese curds from the bowling alley, but she never listens to me. Sissy made a face at Cindy. I'm not having Trey feed my guests fried cheese curds for breakfast. Cindy shook her head. I did freeze reservations when I knew I was going to come here, so the house is only half full. And he promised to wear pants all weekend in case someone needed him. That man is half naked more than any other human being I know. I wish he would realize he lives in a place of business. I can't believe Lachele got you two here for the wedding. Did you drive? Sissy grinned. Sure. I loaded up the car, and we had an old-fashioned road trip. It was fun. Just so Lachele wasn't driving. Samara said with a grin. OMG, Bob never would have let me come. Do you know he has forbidden me to ride with anyone other than him and Cindy after that night? Sissy rolled her eyes. And he made Cindy take a driving test? Samara laughed, feeling the tension and nervousness ease out of her as she talked to her two friends who had both been through what she was going through now. That was a crazy night. I can't believe Bob pulled Lachele over for drunk driving. She does drive like she's drunk 90% of the time, but it's just funny that Bob was the one to stop her. Cindy gave Samara a horrified look. She doesn't drive in New York, does she? No, I don't drive in New York, Lachele said from the doorway. She closed the door behind her and walked up to Cindy and Sissy. And what are you two doing sitting there and not booby bumping with me? Cindy and Sissy rose in unison, Sissy hugging Lachele first and then moving out of the way. Lachele had tears in her eyes as she hugged Cindy. I can't believe I'll have another matrimony munchkin soon. My son may not be giving me grandbabies, but you ladies are making sure I get all I need. She frowned as she looked at Cindy's belly, which was still flat. You need to start showing soon, girl. I'm ready to see a baby bump. Cindy smiled. I'm happy to keep my flat belly for as long as possible. I'm only 6 weeks. I'm not even supposed to be showing yet. That doesn't mean I don't want you to be. Lachele frowned at Cindy. You should have gotten pregnant a few months sooner, so you'd have a nice baby bump now. Were you holding out on Trey? Cindy rolled her eyes. You may have been the one to match us up, but that doesn't mean you get details about our sex lives. Oh, sure it does. Who do you think you're fooling with that nonsense? Sissy laughed. She gives me details, Lachele. I'll fill you in later. Cindy glared at Sissy. Why do I go anywhere with you? 'Cause I look so pretty on your arm? In your dreams. Cindy turned to look at Samara, whose face was now lit up with laughter. You look happy, Sammy. I'm not as nervous as I was before you girls came in, so thank you for that. Lachele obviously did a great job with your matches. She'll do just as well with mine. Of course, I did. Lachele glanced at the clock on the wall. It's time, Sammy. I'll see you when you walk down the aisle. She slipped from the room, leaving Samara with Cindy and Sissy. The door opened again immediately, and Samara frowned, wondering who it could be. When she saw her brother, Wayne, walk through the door, she gave a cry of pure joy, running to him and burying her face in his shoulder. I didn't think you were coming. Of course I was. Do you really think I'd miss my favorite sister's wedding? I'm only your favorite, because your other sister is psycho. True. You're still my favorite, though. He put his arm around her shoulder. Lachele contacted me and gave me the location of the wedding 2 weeks ago, before you even told me what was happening. So when I told you I was busy this weekend, I was, but only because I was coming here to your wedding. Samara felt tears sting her eyes. That crazy woman is good at taking care of me. Wayne kissed the top of Samara's head affectionately. I'm giving you away. Just so you know. Of course you are. She pointed at Cindy and Sissy. These are my friends, Sissy and Cindy. The blonde is Cindy, and the brunette is Sissy. They both married the same way I am. Wayne looked down at Samara. Are you sure you're being smart about this? I mean, I like Lachele and all, but do you really trust her to pick the man you're going to spend the rest of your life with? Samara shrugged. Mostly. I mean, I'm scared right now, but I would be even if I'd chosen the man myself. Pre-wedding jitters and all that nonsense. You mind if I have a talk with him after the wedding? You know, make sure he's not going to cut your throat and leave you for dead? Lachele checked him out. She's not going to let me marry some freak like that, Wayne. She needs me still. He eyed her skeptically. She needs you to work, but you're not her baby sister. I'll be fine. Talk to him if you need to, but don't get ridiculous. Remember when you threatened to cut off Tommy Jenkins's genitals if he tried to kiss me on the first date? That was ridiculous. He never took me out again. She glared at him. Tommy Jenkins is in jail for domestic violence. You should be thanking me. Samara rolled her eyes. Do you see what I put up with? She asked Cindy and Sissy. Cindy looked from Samara to Wayne. I think it's time for us to go get seated. She hurried forward and hugged Samara, kissing her cheek. You look so beautiful today. Samara smiled. Thank you. I sure hope my future husband thinks so. Sissy hugged Samara as well. How could he not? Unless he's blind, he'll recognize the gem he's getting. Samara looked up at Wayne. You're going to behave right? Wayne nodded grudgingly. Of course I will. I really want you to be happy, sis. I trust Lachele. She didn't realize until that moment just how true that was. She knew she was walking down the aisle to the man she'd spend her life with, and who would truly complete her. Lachele was never wrong. She placed her hand in the curve of Wayne's arm and they walked slowly toward the back of the sanctuary. These shoes hurt my feet, Samara whispered. Wayne looked at her in shock. Shoes? I'm surprised you're even wearing them. I figured you'd walk down the aisle barefoot. She grinned at him. Don't think I didn't think about it. Asterisk. Henry watched as his bride and her escort, who was obviously too young to be her father, drifted down the aisle toward him. She was beautiful. Her hair was dark, and she had brown eyes, and the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. He was shocked to find himself attracted to her. He almost called it off at that very moment. He wasn't looking for a love match, just a mother for his nieces. He imagined his heart being encased in ice as he watched her come toward him. There was no time in his life for a woman. She would only take him away from his work and steal the time he should be spending with his nieces. When she got to the front of the church, the man she was with placed her hand in his, and he squeezed hers gently, trying to reassure her. Her eyes looked slightly panicked now that they were close. She obviously was nervous about marrying a stranger, and he thought he could use that to his advantage when they started negotiating their marriage. She would be happy to wait for marital shenanigans. She would understand he didn't have time in his life for her. It was that simple. Chapter 2. As soon as they entered the sanctuary, Samara knew that Lachele had once again done a fabulous job. The man in front of her was strong, and his eyes were shining. He was a good man. She could feel it. And he was so sexy, she couldn't wait to go to bed with him. Standing with her hand in his, she smiled up at him, her eyes full of trust. This was it. The moment she'd waited her entire life for, and she wasn't going to mess it up. The preacher began the ceremony. Samara tried to pay attention, but her eyes were taking in the church and everything around it. She wondered if it was his church. It was a non-denominational, in a small Kansas town. With him by her side, Kansas would be totally doable. Do you, Samara, take Henry to be your lawfully wedded husband? To love, honor, and cherish him, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? I do. Henry. His name was Henry. Do you, Henry, take Samara to be your lawfully wedded wife? To love, honor, and cherish her, for richer and for poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? I do. Samara looked at Henry in shock. It was only 2 words, but had she heard just a little bit of a Scottish burr in those 2 words? Her heart beat faster at the mere idea that he could be a Scot. She loved how they spoke, and dreamed that a Highlander would come and sweep her off her feet. Had she married not only a man who looked sexy as could be, but sounded sexy as well? He'd better be ready to consummate their marriage fast, because she wasn't sure she could stay off him. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Kiss your bride, Henry. Henry seemed uncertain about kissing her, but Samara was having none of that. She grabbed him by his tie, pulling his face down to hers for their first kiss. She pressed her lips to his, and her tongue ventured out to stroke his lips. She wished he'd kiss her properly, but he didn't. He broke it off much sooner than she would have liked, but that was okay. She'd kiss him until he begged for mercy, the first chance they had. They were introduced to the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Henry Crider. She'd married Henry Crider, and he sounded like a Scotsman. They walked toward the back of the church, and the only thing Samara could think about was getting him alone. Slow down, lass. Where ye goin' in such a hurry? Samara felt her knees go weak as her suspicions were confirmed. He was a Scot, and he was hers. Keeping her hand firmly tucked in his, she hurried toward the bride's room, shutting the door behind them. I want a real kiss, she insisted. Henry opened his mouth as if to protest, but she grabbed his tie again, her lips fastening onto his, and kissed him wildly. Her tongue stroked his, and she put her heart and soul into that kiss. Lachele had truly outdone herself this time. Henry finally pulled himself away from the kiss, out of breath and more turned on than he'd ever been in his life. Now, Samara, we need to talk about the way things are going to be between us, before you go too crazy here. I want to go crazy. You are the man I've been waiting for my whole life. Can we skip the reception and go straight to the wedding night? He shook his head. I'm afraid not. Sit down, lass, and we'll have ourselves a chat. Samara frowned. She may be new to this marriage business, but she knew that men were supposed to be eager to consummate the marriage vows. She knew she was. What is there to talk about? She asked as she sat down. Well, I want to start by saying, I think you're a very beautiful woman. I'm just not ready for our wedding night yet. I think we should wait a while to consummate things, until we get to know each other a little better. Maybe in 6 months or so. 6 months? Samara's sweet soft-spoken side went into hiding. There's no way I'm waiting 6 months to have sex with my husband. Have you lost your mind? Calm down, lass. Please don't yell. Let me explain. He took a deep breath, knowing he only had one chance to get this right, and explained to her exactly what he was looking for in a marriage. He couldn't mess it up. I was born in Scotland, and my parents emigrated to America when I was 2 and my brother was 4. James was the best brother any man could ask for. Was? Samara knew this story was going to end in tragedy. Yes, he died 4 months ago. He and his wife Bobby went sailing while I watched their 4-year-old twins, Abigail and Avery. I'm not certain what happened, but their boat capsized and they both drowned. He paced as he talked to her. In their will, they asked that I raise Abby and Avie. I love them both dearly, but raising 4-year-old twins isn't something I had in mind for this point in my life. So you need a wife to help with them? Am I just a nanny with conjugal rights? Henry closed his eyes for a moment. He was muddling things, and he thought they were going so well. I didn't want a nanny. I wanted someone who would be more of a mother to the girls. Someone who would learn to love them as I do. Samara shook her head. I'm good with children. I won't have a problem learning to love them, but I want a real husband. A man who is interested in me as a woman, not just a glorified nanny. I am interested in you as a woman, Samara. More interested than I'd like to be, I'm afraid. You are causing stirrings in my body I'd rather not be feeling right now. My problem is, I don't feel like I should be having sex with a woman I've just met. I want us to share a room, because I don't want the girls to think anything strange is going on, but I don't plan on touching you. You've got to be kidding me. So we're going to sleep together every night and not make love? Why did I marry then? I hope you married for more than just sex. I hope you married for companionship and for a desire for a lifelong mate. Of course, I did. Samara shook her head. It just doesn't sound like you did. I want those things, but I don't necessarily feel like I'm ready for them today. I want to move more slowly. My business takes up too much of my time now, and I don't feel like I have the time to devote to a wife and family. In another year, if my financial plans go as I'd like, I'll have more free time, and then I will feel like I can be married. She stared at him for a moment, trying to figure out if he was joking. Are you serious? I wouldn't say something like this if I wasna serious, lass. He sighed. I don't want to disappoint you, but for right now, I need a helper. Someone who will be by my side when I need help with the children and the stress of daily life. I don't need a bed warmer. A bed warmer? You're acting as if I've got loose morals and sleep around. Nothing could be further from the truth. I expected to lose my virginity tonight, on my wedding night. Henry nodded. I'm a virgin as well. I just know that once I cross that line and start having sexual relations, I'm not going to be able to stay as serious about my work as I currently am. So what you want from me is simply someone to take care of the house, take care of the children, and run things, while you take care of your business. Is that right? Exactly. I'm glad you're agreeable. Oh, I never said I was agreeable. I married you thinking I was getting a real marriage. One where we work together to build a future for ourselves and any children we may have. She stood up and walked toward him, pleased to see that he backed up a couple of steps as she got close. I will not be disrespected this way. She poked him in the chest. Don't poke me. That hurts. I don't care. I'll poke you all I want, since you obviously won't be poking me. Thanks for ruining my wedding day. She wished she hadn't signed the contract stating she'd stay with him for a year. There was nothing in the world she wanted more than to get right back on a plane and go back to Manhattan, where men weren't stupid. Henry gaped at his new bride as if she'd lost her mind. He thought she'd be relieved that he wouldn't expect sex until they'd gotten to know one another better. Look, Samara, I'm sorry to upset you. It's just that I've never been with a woman before, and I feel like I need to get to know you first. That's not true. You already gave me the real reason. I've never had sex before either, but that doesn't mean I wasn't planning to ride you like a cowgirl on my wedding night. Henry blushed, annoyed with her for causing it. Already she was getting under his skin, and that was just what he didn't want to happen. Are you going to say things like that to me a lot? Because I don't like it. Samara took a step closer to him, her hands flattened on his chest. Really? Your blush says otherwise. I wish you'd stop touching me so much. She laughed. You know, I'm going to touch you all I want, whenever I want. Maybe you won't make love with me, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to do everything I can to drive you absolutely crazy. She stood on tiptoe and kissed him, pressing her body against his. Get used to it. Henry backed away from her. It's time we went to the reception, he said, his voice a half octave higher than he wanted it to be. He flushed in embarrassment. Let's go. I'd love to meet your nieces. You won't take your anger with me out on them, will you? He asked, his voice soft. You should have thought of that before you married me, but no, I won't. I love children, and I would never mistreat one, just because her guardian was an ass. I don't like your language. Samara stopped and stared at him in disbelief. You can mess with my life however you want, but I can't retaliate by calling you an ass? I promise, I won't say it in front of the girls. She lifted the skirt of her dress in one hand and wrenched the door open, following the noise to the church's fellowship hall. When she walked into the fellowship hall, there was applause, and she turned to see that Henry was right behind her. He draped his arm loosely around her waist, obviously wanting it to look like they were happy. She thought for a moment about shrugging him off, but decided not to be that petty. Cindy rushed over and hugged her. He's got a Scottish accent, she hissed in Samara's ear. He's hard-headed, rigid, and if I don't kill him within the week, it will be a miracle, Samara responded. Cindy covered her mouth with her hand as if to prevent a giggle. Sorry, Sammy. Me too. Sissy hurried over, taking her turn hugging Samara. He's not quite as sexy as Deputy Bob, but that accent could make a girl go weak in the knees. Samara laughed. Yes, it could. She sighed. I guess that accent helps to make up for where he's lacking. She looked at Henry, who was smiling down at her with a look of love, and she wanted to hit him. He didn't look at her like that while they were alone, only in public. Henry, these are my friends, Sissy and Cindy. It's nice to meet you, Henry responded. He didn't ask which was which, because he never expected to see them again. I'd like to take you over to meet the girls if you don't mind, Samara. Samara nodded, wondering if she'd ever be able to handle him saying her name with that accent without wanting to fall at his feet. She followed him across the room to where an older woman sat at a long table between two identical girls, petite and angelic-looking. They were both eating chips from small paper plates. Avi? I want you to meet your new aunt, Samara. One of the girls looked at Samara, studying her. Are you going to be our new mommy? Samara squatted down beside the girl's chair, ignoring the fact that she was getting her wedding dress dirty. Are you Abby or Avi? Avi. The girl had blonde hair and blue eyes, and was cute as a button. Samara felt her heart melting a bit. Well, I'll do mommy things for you, but I won't take the place of your mommy. You had a mommy who loved you a lot. You can call me Aunt Sammy, or you can call me mommy if that's easier for you. The little girl stared at her for a moment. Can I call you Aunt Sammy for a while? And maybe mommy later? Absolutely. I'd be honored to be called either one. I'm glad I get to live with you. Avi nodded seriously. Me too. But not tonight. Tonight we're staying with Grandma Betty, so you can spend time with Uncle Henry. I bet that was Grandma Betty's idea, wasn't it? Yes, Aunt Sammy. Well, when you come home tomorrow, we'll spend some time together. Do you like books? We could read some books together. Avi's face lit up at the questions. I love books. My mommy read to me before she sank in the water. Samara felt her heart going out to the little girl. No matter how angry she was with Henry, she would make sure these children always knew she loved them. I will read to you all you want. I love to read. She glanced down the table toward Abby, who was watching her with her sister. I'm going to go meet Abby, okay? Avi nodded. Abby is my sister. People think we look alike. You don't think so? Samara asked. The girls were dressed in identical pink dresses, with white sashes tied around their waists. They certainly looked alike to her. Avi shrugged. Maybe a little. Samara got up and walked around, pulling out the chair next to Abby. I like your sister, she said. Abby nodded. She likes you too, Aunt Sammy. Did you hear everything we said to each other? Yes. I'm glad you were nice to her. Avi is having a hard time since Mommy died. I know, and that's understandable. It's hard to lose someone you love. Did you ever lose anyone you love? Samara nodded. My parents died too. My daddy died while I was in high school. He had cancer. My mom died while I was in college. It's hard to be an orphan, isn't it? Abby asked so seriously, Samara had to fight back the tears. It is hard to be an orphan, but you have each other, and Uncle Henry, and now you have me. We're going to all be happy together. I'd like that. Samara stood walking back to Henry. Do they have to stay with Grandma Betty tonight? She whispered. He nodded. I don't want anyone to suspect that our marriage isn't real, so yes, they need to stay with her tonight. We'll go get them early tomorrow afternoon. Betty watches them during the week. Is she their maternal grandmother? He shook his head. No relation. She just watches them while I work. They love her and asked if they could call her Grandma Betty. She's my neighbor. Samara nodded. That will make it easy while I work then. What do you do? She'd forgotten until that moment that he knew as little about her as she knew about him. I'm Dr. Lachele's assistant. I do a lot of the testing and handle phone calls. She's going to let me telecommute. When I first went to her, I thought she'd find me a man in Manhattan, or one who was willing to move there, but she said this would work out fine. She is going to have to make her own coffee, though. Henry grinned. I'm sure she'll survive. He found her enjoyable to be around when she wasn't yelling at him or poking him, and the way she'd handled the twins was just perfect. She would be good for all three of them. What do you do? She asked. I own my own construction company. We build custom homes. Do you travel for work? She couldn't imagine there was enough work building custom homes in the small community to keep him busy. I go up to 70 miles in any direction, so I cover a pretty wide area, but I'm home every night. He looked at the girls. I did travel quite a bit before the accident, but the girls are the most important things in my life now. Samara sighed. She couldn't fault his love for his nieces. Lachele came up behind her then, her eyes twinkling. It's time to cut the cake. Samara's eyes narrowed. Had Lachele known he didn't want a real relationship to start with? If she had known, would she have told her? Probably not. She'd talked to her on Monday, when Henry wasn't superglued to her side. She looked sideways at him. That man was more like hot glue. They cut the cake, and though she wanted to be rude and smash the cake into his face simply because she was angry with him, she didn't. She fed it to him nicely. Once that was finished, they mingled, and Henry introduced her to his employees and his friends from the church. When he introduced her to the pastor, the older man gripped her hand warmly. "It's so nice to meet you. You two met in a very unusual way, but I can't say I think it's a problem. When two Christians meet for the first time at the altar, it bypasses any chance for premarital shenanigans. I look forward to getting to know you better." Henry shook the man's hand. "Thanks, Pastor John. I'm looking forward to your sermon tomorrow." Pastor John shook his head emphatically. "You two are not going to come to church tomorrow. You only have one day off before you head back to work. You need to spend that time getting to know each other." Henry frowned. He didn't want to get to know Samara any better. She was too close to perfect for his tastes. A shrinking wallflower never would have worked for him, because he'd have run all over her. No, Samara was his ideal woman in every way, from her looks to her personality. Getting to know her better would be a huge mistake and one he didn't plan on making. Maybe he could talk her into going to a movie that evening. Lachele stepped up behind Samara. "It's time for you two to head out," she said softly. "No one can politely leave until you do." Samara nodded, hugging Lachele tightly. "I'm going to miss seeing you at work every day. It's not like you've seen the last of me. I'll be here again to check up on you and make sure Henry is treating you right." Henry took her elbow, guiding her back to the bride's room. "Do you need to grab anything before we go?" "Yeah, there are a couple of things I need. Purse and suitcases." "You grab the purse and I'll get the suitcases," he told her. "Too manly to touch a purse? Would it make your goobies dry up and fall off?" Henry stopped walking and turned, giving her a look of disbelief. "My goobies? Really?" She shrugged. "That's what my brother always called his." "Your brother is weird. I've been telling him that for years." Wayne stood in the doorway. "Why am I weird?" Samara rushed across the room to him, hugging him. "When do you head home?" "Tomorrow morning." Wayne looked at Henry over the top of her head. "You'd better treat my sister right. I don't want to have to cut your goobies off and hang them from the nearest tree." As soon as he said the word goobies, Henry and Samara exchanged a look, before dissolving into laughter. Wayne rolled his eyes. "You two met just a couple of hours ago, and you already have inside jokes?" He looked at Samara. "You're on your own, Sammy. You two were made for each other." Samara met Henry's eyes. "That's what Lachele tells me. I guess time will tell." She picked up her purse from the floor, all laughter forgotten at her brother's words. Even if they were made for each other, Henry was going to keep them apart. It was obvious. Wayne watched his sister with a wary look in his eyes. "You okay, Sammy?" Samara put on her brightest smile. No one knew her quite like Wayne did. "I'm fine. Thanks again for coming all this way to give me away. I'm going to miss you like crazy." Wayne smiled. "I'm already making plans to come out here for Christmas." Samara grinned. "I'm so glad." "Oh, don't get so excited. I just want to eat your cooking." Samara laughed, knowing better. "You always say that, but I know you're really going to come here to see me. And the girls, of course. Are you looking forward to playing uncle to those gorgeous girls?" Wayne nodded. I'm already thinking about what noisy presents I can get them. Something that will make it impossible for you to read. Samara slapped his arm as they walked out of the church together, Henry walking a few steps behind. No one gets to keep me from my reading. Wayne looked over his shoulder at Henry. Just watch her when she's trying to read while cooking. Does she burn things? Henry asked, looking genuinely interested in Wayne's answer. Yup. She burned Samara. When they got to the parking lot, Wayne stopped at a car. This is my rental. Samara hugged her brother again, resting her head on his shoulder for a moment. It's going to be strange not to be able to just call you up and invite you for supper. Who's going to feed me? Wayne asked. I guess you'll have to have Dr. Lachele find you a girl so she can feed you and you can stop relying on me so much. Wayne sighed. Guess so. Samara stood with Henry as Wayne drove off. She brushed the tear from her eye. I'm really going to miss that idiot. Henry shook his head. He couldn't figure out what to think of his wife. Chapter 3. Henry led Samara to his truck, throwing her suitcase into the back seat. Samara frowned at the huge step up. It wouldn't have normally bothered her, but her dress had such a full skirt she felt strangely exposed climbing inside. How far from here do you live? She asked quietly, wondering about her new life. It's about a 5-minute drive. As he drove through the quiet streets of Tville, Kansas, he pointed out interesting places. He showed her where he usually shopped for groceries, all the gas stations, and even where he'd gone to school. He pulled up in front of a large, 2-story house that looked as if it had been built in the last year or so. Did you build it? She asked. Yeah. My man and I did. It took us forever, because we had to do it around the for-pay work. Henry looked at his house critically, trying to see it as if for the first time. He couldn't help but wonder what she'd think. Did you do the designs yourself? Or do you just build them? She opened the door and slid to the ground. Some of each. I work with an architect who makes my designs viable. He snagged her suitcases from the back, wondering what she had in there. It was a lot heavier than it should have been, even for a suitcase of that size. You have rocks in this thing? Of course not. I have books. There are only about 15 that I really didn't want to be without, and didn't trust to the postal service. I usually read on my Kindle. Are you serious? You brought 15 books? It's not going to take that long for your boxes to arrive, is it? Not at all. Those are my favorite autographed books, though. I can't trust those to just anyone. I had to bring them myself. He looked at her as if she'd lost her mind, but said nothing, walking to the front door and opening it. He put her suitcase by the front door. Want the tour now, or later? Oh, definitely now. She rubbed her stomach. I'm hungry. I hope you have something for me to cook. I was thinking we could go to a movie tonight. There's a theater close by that does the dinner and a movie thing. He thought about that for a moment. Maybe it would be better if they did the two separately. They'd have less time alone that way. He didn't need to be tempted by her. Or we could go to dinner and then a movie? Would you prefer that? No, combined works for me. She walked into the kitchen, since he made no move to start her tour. It was a huge gourmet kitchen with a big island in the middle. One side was obviously meant for cooking, and the other had 4 bar stools pushed up to it. There was a booth in front of the kitchen windows, and it looked like a cozy place to eat. The appliances were all stainless steel, with a double oven and a microwave built in. I could fall in love with this kitchen. She could just picture herself standing at the counter cooking, her Kindle in one hand, the other mixing something in a bowl. He smiled. I'm glad. He led her from the kitchen into a huge dining room with a formal table. We don't eat in here often, And I probably wouldn't have chosen to have a formal dining room if I'd known the twins would be coming to live with me. I can't picture our girls eating in here. His eyes jerked to her face when she said our girls. Had she really accepted them so quickly? No, we'll do holiday meals in here, but mostly we just eat at the booth in the kitchen. I think that makes a lot of sense. There's no reason to force the girls to be uncomfortable. Samara kept walking through to a large den. It had comfortable-looking furniture and 2 miniature recliners. I bet the girls adore those. He nodded. We watch television in here in the evenings a lot. I should interact with them more, but I'm always dead on my feet by the time I get in from work. My hours are long and hard. Samara nodded, making a mental note of that fact as she kept going in the circle through the first floor of the house. There was a formal living room next, and she wrinkled her nose. The furniture was all white, and she couldn't imagine the girls in there at all. Don't tell me. You wouldn't have set this up this way if you'd known the twins were coming. Nay. I wouldn't have. The last room was more of a mess than anything else. It had a desk that was covered with blueprints and other papers, a computer, and a phone. There was a fax machine and a printer off to one side. She hoped that wasn't where he planned for her to work. It was obviously his space, and she didn't want to have to share with him. Is there another room I can use for an office? He nodded. Dr. Lachele warned me you'd need an office, so I readied a room for you upstairs. He grabbed her suitcase, before taking the stairs 2 at a time. When he'd reached the top, he turned and watched her climbing the stairs, her dress held up slightly so she wouldn't step on it. She reminded him of Cinderella climbing the stairs to the ball. He wished he could take a video of her ascension so he could take it out and watch it many times in the future. He shook his head. Nay. I canna think of her that way. He moved out of the way as she reached the top of the stairs, setting her suitcase just inside the master bedroom, which was off to the left. He took her to the right. This is the girls' room. I gave them the choice of having their own rooms, but they wanted to sleep together. Samara popped her head inside the room, noting that neither of the 2 white beds had been made. Everything that was there was twinned. There were identical white dressers, identical baby doll cradles, and the beds were identical with matching pink bedspreads. She wondered if the girls liked to have everything the same or if they'd like to assert their individuality. They'd certainly have the right to do that with her. The next room was a small office. It had everything the downstairs office had except the fax machine. I hope you'll be okay with going downstairs to fax. Samara nodded. I rarely do any faxing. She walked into the room, running her hand over the desktop computer. This is going to work well for me. Thank you for having it ready. Dr. Lachele said you'd need it. I didn't realize you worked for her at the time, but I'm glad it's what you want. He waited for her to walk out of the room and took her to 2 spare bedrooms. Each had a king bed, perfectly made up. Do you want me to just take one of the spare rooms? She asked. He shook his head. I want the twins to think that we're in love, just like their mommy and daddy were. She sighed. All right. She thought he'd lost his mind, but she didn't say it. He really expected 2 people, who were obviously attracted to each other, to share a bed with nothing happening. She had a feeling he was in for a big surprise. She couldn't promise she wouldn't wake him up, demanding her marital rights. He led her back down the hall, toward the master bedroom. He pointed out 2 bathrooms along the way. Guest bath. Girls' bath. Finally, he reached his bedroom, the room that he was proudest of in the entire house, and stepped aside for her to precede him. Samara walked into the room and smiled. First off, it was the biggest bedroom she'd ever been in. Her entire apartment in Manhattan would have fit into his bedroom. The bed was king-sized, and the headboard was covered with shelves. There was an armchair in one corner of the room, and a small table beside it. Everywhere she looked, she saw a place to read. She walked into the bathroom and gaped. The tub was huge, definitely big enough for two, and she blushed at where her thoughts led her. She could see the jets in it. There was a separate shower, and the toilet had a door, so she could take a bath while he used the bathroom, and she didn't have to listen to him. His and her sinks were in front of a huge mirror. She could get used to this place. She opened a door off the bathroom, and her eyes grew even wider. It was a huge closet. Her mind turned the closet into a reading room, but she shook her head. Her bedroom would be a perfect reading room. There was a built-in chest of drawers at the back of the closet, and each side had ample room for hanging clothes and shelves from floor to ceiling. She stopped as she looked at something on the opposite wall of the chest of drawers. "What's this?" He grinned. "As a wedding gift, I made you a shoe rack. All women love shoes, right?" Samara looked at it more closely. There was room for at least 40 pairs of shoes there. She shook her head. "I only own 4 pairs of shoes." "4?" he asked, surprised. "Why do you only own 4 pairs of shoes?" "That's all I need. All my spare money goes into books." She looked back at the rack. "I know. I can put my shoes in the bottom 4 holes, and I'll put my books in the others. I can sort them by author. It's perfect." She threw her arms around him without thinking. "Thank you." She stood on tiptoe and kissed him, before whirling away and looking at her gift again. He hadn't meant to give her a bookshelf, but it was perfect for what she needed anyway. Henry stood watching her, not sure how to react to the kiss at all. Surely she wasn't really so excited about a bookshelf that was meant to be a shoe rack. She rushed out to the hall and pulled her big suitcase into the bedroom. When she started to try to lift it onto the bed, he lifted it for her. It was too heavy for a woman to be lifting, in his opinion. She opened it wide, pulling out the books she'd considered too precious to ship, vaguely wondering how he'd react when the 12 boxes of books she hadn't considered too precious to ship arrived. She carried 4 of the books to the shelf and lined them up on the top row, a smile lighting her face. "Look. They fit perfectly. If the squares were just an inch shorter, the books wouldn't fit at all." He shook his head at her. "I'm going to change for the movie and check times while you play with your books." Samara nodded, already lost in putting her things away. When she pulled out the nightgown she'd purchased for their wedding night, she started to ball it up and stuff it in the bottom drawer, but instead she held it to her. It was soft pink with spaghetti straps, satin, and form-fitting. She grinned. She'd wear it that night anyway. He may think he was in charge of everything, but she had every right in the world to wear sexy things for her new husband on her wedding night. She pulled jeans and a sweatshirt from the suitcase, changing in the closet. She thought for a moment about pretending she couldn't reach the zipper on the back of her wedding dress, but she'd never done coy well. No, she'd be right in his face with what she wanted and needed. No need to start her marriage off with silly deceptions. When she was dressed, she hung up her wedding dress carefully. She'd felt like a princess wearing it, but she had never been a girly girl. It was time to get back to being Samara and not royalty. As the thought crossed her mind, she wished she'd thought to get a tiara for the wedding, but things had been too rushed. No matter. She'd still wear one whenever she wanted. She stepped out into the bedroom from the closet and found Henry sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at one of the books she'd unpacked. "You read romance?" he asked, his voice full of scorn. Samara sat down beside him on the bed, touching him from shoulder to knee. "I do." "Do you want to know why I read romance?" "Why?" "Because romance books ensure something that no other genre does, something that is missing all too often from our lives today. Romance novels ensure a happily ever after. I can and do read other books, but when I want a true escape, a world where I know the boy will get the girl, and the girl will love being gotten, I read a romance. I read romance because I believe there's good in this world, and I refuse to think the way we see things is the only way it could ever be. I read romance, because romance is worth reading, and I dare you to tell me it's not. Henry stared at her for a moment, realizing he'd hit a nerve. I don't think less of you for reading a romance. Yes, you do. I see it in your eyes. Let me tell you something, Henry Crider, some of the most intelligent women I know read and write romance. Even some men read it, and if you ever want to be able to treat a woman right, I suggest you make a study of it. She got up and went into the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. One of her pet peeves was the way people made fun of romance. They acted like it wasn't real literature. Romance books were the bread and butter of every publishing company, and if that didn't make them real, she didn't know what did. Henry stared at the closed bathroom door, wondering if she'd just closed it because she had to get away from him. He looked down at the book in his hand and sighed. He never should have acted like her choice of books wasn't good enough. Being a husband was a lot harder than it looked. He put the rest of her books in the closet on the shoe rack, knowing he wasn't organizing them the way she would, but at least she wouldn't have to carry them herself. Moving her suitcase into the closet as well, he touched her wedding dress with one hand. Samara had taken his breath away when she'd walked down the aisle toward him, and he could honestly say he'd been running scared since. Once Samara was certain she could control her temper, she stepped back into the bedroom. What movie do you want to see? He shrugged. I guess that new romantic comedy. He knew he had to make up some ground and figured a chick flick was the best way to go about it. Sounds good. I hope it doesn't make your goobie shrivel up and fall off. She preceded him out of the bedroom and down the stairs, determined to make sure he realized he was in the doghouse. Why, if they were having sex, she'd send him out of the bedroom as soon as she was done with him and make him sleep on the couch. Henry watched her hurry ahead of him down the stairs. She was still angry, obviously, and he wanted to do what he could to keep the peace. Do you have a car coming? He asked, trying to be polite. No, but I do know how to drive. I'll see about getting one if I need one. He opened the door for her and walked with her to his truck. I'll get one. You'll definitely need one here. No public transportation in a town this small. I'm used to walking. It's not a big deal. But it would be hard to get groceries home if you walked. He fastened his seat belt. Regular car or mom mobile? What's a mom mobile? Like a minivan or an SUV? I don't care. Is one safer for the twins? He hadn't exactly said it, but she had a feeling the girls would be her responsibility 90% of the time. It was a good thing she liked kids. He shrugged. I'd probably feel better with you driving a medium-sized SUV or a minivan. Then one of those would be fine. I certainly don't want the girls hurt if there's a wreck. I'll look into it. Samara stared out the window. They'd left Tville and were driving on a 4-lane country highway. All she could see on either side of the truck were wheat fields. So much wheat, she finally said. He laughed. We're in farm country in Kansas. Of course there's wheat. When he parked in front of the theater, she put her hand on the door handle. They'd said little to one another the entire drive. Wait, he said. There's something I need to say before we go in. She looked at him. What's that? I'm really sorry. I never should have said that about the books you read. I've never read one, so I don't have the right to have an opinion on them. Samara nodded. Thanks for admitting that. They're not all smut or trash, you know. I don't think you'd read them if they were. She got out of the car, feeling slightly better, thanks to his apology. She wished he'd apologize for the whole no-sex agenda, but she knew that would be pushing it. The theater had regular theater seats, but a long table in front of each row to use for their food. Samara preferred books to movies, so when it was time to watch one, it always felt better if she could accomplish something else while she watched it. Eating had to be done anyway. Once they were seated, she read through the menu and chose what she wanted, and then pulled out her Kindle to read through the previews and advertisements at the beginning. After the waiter took their orders, she immediately picked up her Kindle again. Watching her, Henry wondered if she was reading because she was angry with him, or if it was just because it's what she did. After the movie was over, he took her hand in his as they walked to the parking lot. She looked at him in surprise. "Keeping up appearances?" she asked. "No. I'm on a date with a beautiful woman. I want to hold your hand." "Is that so awful?" She shrugged. It was so strange to her that he wanted to hold her hand, but he didn't want to make love. They were married. Maybe this was his way of getting to know her better? While they drove home, they talked about the movie. Samara would have preferred to read some more, but she didn't want to come across as rude on their first day of marriage. "Maybe in a week." "I loved the scene at the restaurant where they kissed for the first time," she told him. "You did? The kiss didn't seem weird to you?" "Why would it seem weird?" "Well, they were on a blind date, and he kissed her for the first time within an hour of meeting her, in a public place. I think first kisses are for dark doorways as you say goodnight. Or in a car." Samara frowned. "Our first kiss was in front of a church full of people." "That's different." "Why?" "I'm not being rude, but I really don't understand." Henry shrugged. "Because we kissed as part of a ceremony, and we didn't get all weird and use tongue in front of people or anything." "They did." "Nah. I read the actors hated each other when they were shooting that movie." "Well, it looked like a very intimate, private moment that they had in front of everyone. Besides, I don't think people should kiss until the fourth or fifth date. A man needs to know he has real feelings for a woman before they ever kiss." It was as if a light bulb went off in Samara's head. "Is that why you think we should wait? You think we need to be sure we have real feelings for each other first? And it's not just lust?" Even when she'd been angry with him earlier, every time he spoke, she wanted to jump his bones. He truly could turn her on with just a few words. It was going to be a long few months if she couldn't convince him to change his mind. That's a lot of it. I don't think God wants us to just run around having sex with people we barely know. She nodded slowly. "So you don't think people in arranged marriages should have sex until they've known each other for a long time? There were even some arranged marriages in the Bible." "I never really thought about it," he admitted. "Maybe you should. The Bible says we need to wait until we're married for sex. Nothing says we need to wait until we know each other well enough to boink each other's brains out. We're married. We're attracted to each other. Well, I'm attracted to you, and I assume you're attracted to me?" Henry sighed. "Of course, I am. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman." "Even though I read romance?" "Then I think denying ourselves a pleasure that God set aside for married people is actually going against His will, not honoring Him." Henry parked the truck in front of their house. "I'll think about that. I do want to know you better before anything happens between us. I'm old-fashioned that way." "Well, you can think that's for the best, but I think we should just go upstairs, rip our clothes off, and go at each other like rabbits." "I mean, why not?" He shook his head. "You have a way with words, Samara." She smiled happily. "I know. I'm going to write my own romance novel someday, and people are going to realize that there's not just fluff in my head." She unbuckled her seatbelt and slid across the front seat to him. Reaching up, she touched his cheek. "We're in your truck in the dark. Isn't that one of your acceptable places for a first kiss, Henry?" He laughed. "It is." "Then first kiss me." "The others don't count, because I had to initiate them all." "Kiss me like you mean it." Henry took a deep breath. He knew it wasn't the smartest thing to do at that moment, but she was his wife, and she was beautiful. He lowered his head, his lips barely grazing hers at first, but when her lips immediately parted for him, he deepened the kiss. Wrapping his arms around her, so he wouldn't be tempted to touch her in a way that was inappropriate, he poured everything he'd been feeling the entire day into the kiss. Samara let out a happy sigh as he finally kissed her the way she'd wanted him to. One hand went to rest at the back of his neck while her other crept to his shoulder, softly kneading the muscles there through the thin t-shirt he wore. If only she could find the magic words to convince him they should go upstairs and make love, making it a real wedding night, she'd be in heaven. Finally, Henry lifted his head, panting slightly. "You're some woman, Samara Crider." Samara smiled. He hadn't seen anything yet. Chapter 4. "I'm going to get a long hot bath and read for a bit," Samara told him once they were inside. "You're not saying you'll read in the tub, are you?" Henry had never heard of someone reading in the bathtub. Of course. He watched her as she gathered clothes, but stopped her when she got her Kindle from her purse. "You can't take electronics in the bathtub. Take one of your paperbacks." She sighed. "I might lose my keys or other unimportant things on occasion, but this is my Kindle. No way will I drop it. Besides, the paperbacks I brought are irreplaceable. They're signed by the authors." She walked into the bathroom and closed the door, locking it behind her. He was going to be a pain about her reading everywhere. She could tell. That was a fight she was ready to win. After her bath, she slipped into her wedding nightgown and left the bathroom, flipping off the light as she went. Henry was already in bed, but he wasn't asleep yet, and he looked at her as she climbed into bed. He groaned. "Can't you wear shorts and a t-shirt to sleep? Go in the closet and get one of my tees." "No, I'll be a lot more comfortable in this." "Unless you'd rather I took it off?" She grabbed the hem and started to lift it. She didn't know how she'd react if he told her to do it, because she'd never stripped for a man, and down deep, she was really not exactly thrilled with her body. She was female after all. Henry closed his eyes quickly, holding up one hand. As much as he wanted to see her naked, he was worried about where it would lead. "No, fine. Wear that to bed." Samara smiled, knowing she'd won that battle. She slipped into bed, sliding straight to the middle, to cuddle against him. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Well, you want us to get to know each other better, so I thought we could snuggle up together and talk." She made certain to keep her voice innocent as she wrapped one arm around his waist and rested her head on his shoulder. He was wearing pajamas, and she felt like laughing. If he'd slept in more than just his underwear in the past 20 years, she'd be shocked. He looked at her for a moment before nodding. "What do you want to talk about?" "Anything. Why don't you tell me about Scotland?" As she'd suspected would happen, when he talked about Scotland, his brogue became deeper and more pronounced, sending shivers through her body. "My parents moved back there about 5 years ago. They said it was where they'd always planned to retire, and Dad's health made it necessary for him to retire then. My brother and I ran his business after that. I try to make it back to Scotland every couple of years, to see my parents and other family there. They only met the twins briefly for the funeral." "Oh, that's sad. What are your parents like?" "Obviously your dad was a hard worker, but how about your mom? Was she the June Cleaver type?" He smiled. "In some ways. She was like a cross between June Cleaver and Roseanne. She would always have special snacks waiting when we got home from school, but she told it like it was, with every bit of sarcasm inside her. I miss her every day." Samara smiled. "I'm glad you're a tight-knit family. Do you have any other siblings?" "No sisters?" "Nope. Just me and my brother. That's why the twins mean so much to me, I think. I felt like my world ended when James died. I felt the same when I lost each of my parents. She stroked his chest with her hand, her fingers sliding between the buttons on his pajama top. Time will help. It won't heal you entirely. I still cry over silly things that remind me of my parents a lot. Do you have any siblings other than your brother? What was his name? Wayne. Yes, I have one sister, but she's insane. Her name's Barbara. Samara didn't like to think about her sister, so she rarely spoke of her. Insane how? Oh, in one of those boring sisterly ways that I can't explain. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Was she at the wedding? He asked. Samara gave a short laugh. I forgot to tell her I was getting married. Oops. Henry laughed, shaking Samara in the process. How could you forget to tell her? She shrugged. I'm a lot closer to my brother than I am to her. I can tell. You invited him to your wedding. She grinned. Well, I did, but he told me he already had plans for the weekend and couldn't make it. I was really mad at him. He walked into the bride's room, and he shocked the snot out of me. Lachele called him right after you two spoke, and she told him he'd better be here, or it would totally ruin the day for me. He came ready to give me away. Oh, I had no idea he'd surprised you. That's really nice. He was finally getting more comfortable with lying in bed with her and just talking. It seemed strange, but it was a good strange. Samara yawned. I can't believe how tired I am. What time is it? She knew there'd been a time change, and she'd been up early for her flight, but it still didn't seem like it should be time for her to be so sleepy yet. Henry glanced at the clock. It's just after 11. Is that late for you? No, that's about normal, but I was up early, and I'm still on East Coast time. Are you sure you don't want to take advantage of our wedding night and make this beautiful bed shake? He pressed a quick kiss to her lips. I'm sure. It's not that I don't want to. I feel like waiting is the right thing to do. Fine. Samara rolled to her side of the bed and fluffed her pillow, reaching over to turn off the lamp on her nightstand. Good night, Henry. Henry smiled as he watched her settle down to sleep before turning off his own light. He'd asked for a wife, and he'd gotten her. No doubt about that. She was everything he wanted in a wife. God help him. Asterisk. Samara woke up in bed alone, uncertain if she was happy or sad about that. One less chance to wear her nightgown in front of her new husband, but it also gave her a minute or two to regroup. Things had definitely not gone the way she'd expected the day before. She ducked into the bathroom to brush her teeth and got dressed, before going downstairs. Henry was in the kitchen, pacing as he talked on his cell phone. I'll need it as soon as possible. Samara walked to the fridge, digging around to see what would be good for breakfast. She hoped he hadn't eaten yet, but a look at the clock said it was only 7 in the morning. She couldn't help but wonder what kind of business he was doing so early. She heard him set the phone down and turn to him, hugging him as if their marriage were a real one, pulling his head down for a morning kiss. Are you hungry? He looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. Are you going to kiss me whenever you feel like it? Samara shrugged. Why not? We're married, and I like kissing you. Have you had breakfast yet? No, I waited for you. Do you want to go out for breakfast? Henry hated spending money eating out all the time, but until they went to get the twins that afternoon, he wanted to be alone with her for as little time as possible. Nah. I like to cook. Omelette? Scrambled eggs? French toast? I like French toast a lot. Oh good. That's one of my favorites. French toast, bacon, and coffee. You are a coffee drinker, aren't you? Sometimes. Sometimes? Oh, that's harsh. Okay, starting coffee and then bacon. She found the coffee pot and got some going immediately. What kind of man didn't drink coffee first thing in the morning? He was a heretic. He should have had it waiting for her. She thought Lachele had screened him. No sex was one thing, but no coffee? He probably didn't even like chocolate. He left the room while she fixed breakfast. He'd been running around in his pajamas, so she was certain he wanted to go change while she was otherwise occupied. By the time he returned, she had the French toast and bacon on the table and was finishing her second cup of coffee. She moved to the table to sit with him, and he took her hand, surprising her. She understood what he was about when he immediately bowed his head to pray. Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this food you've provided us with. Thank you for sending Samara to the girls and me. We need her. Please help both Samara and I to do all we can to glorify you with our marriage and help us not to get upset with each other about small things. Help us to work through the big things that must be worked through. We pray all this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Amen, Samara echoed. Did he think he was glorifying God by not having sex with her? The man was odd. So what are your plans for the day? She doctored her French toast with butter and syrup. Well, I was planning on going to church this morning, but the pastor made it clear that I shouldn't do that, so I'll probably go to the car dealership my friend owns. I was just talking to him, and he has a couple of vehicles he thinks will fit. Do you want to come with me? As soon as he asked, he wanted to bite his tongue. He didn't need a woman there with him when he bought a car. It would be so much simpler if he could just go on his own. Samara nodded. I wouldn't mind being able to test drive it before we buy, since I'll be the primary driver. That makes sense. Should we get the girls first? I can't imagine what having two small children at a car dealership would be like. I've heard it takes hours and hours to make a deal on a car. I didn't think about that. You're right. We should probably go right after breakfast. Dealership is technically closed till noon, but my friend said he'd open early. Maybe we can have it done before we need to pick up the girls this afternoon. 5 hours later, she was following him to a restaurant in her new minivan. Samara hadn't driven much, so it was strange to be behind the wheel again. The seat was higher than she was used to as well. There weren't a lot of minivans in Manhattan unless they were taxis. They went inside the chain restaurant and the hostess took them to a booth. How did it handle on the way here? Henry asked. Samara shrugged. I'm not sure how it was supposed to handle, but it seemed fine. I like it. Good. I'll put the girls' car seats in it as soon as we get home. We'll use the van as a family car, and then I can stop taking them places in my work truck. I probably should have gotten a more child-friendly vehicle as soon as they came to live with me, but it seemed a waste when I was the only driver. She nodded at him, studying the menu. I think I just want a salad, she finally announced. Sounds good. I'm getting steak. They talked while they ate. She talked about what it was like growing up with her two siblings in upstate New York, and he talked about growing up in T-ville. When they'd finished eating, he glanced at the time on his phone and tried to keep his relief visible. As soon as they got back to T-ville, they'd need to pick up the girls. He was ready to have them as a buffer between him and his sweet wife. After the fight they'd had in the bride's room, he'd expected them to be constantly butting heads, but that was far from the case. He genuinely liked her, more than he cared to admit. They parked both vehicles in the driveway before walking next door to pick up Abby and Avi. Henry knocked on the door and waited. The girls came running to him, squealing with excitement. Uncle Henry. Henry took each of the girls in one arm and lifted them up, hugging them close. I missed you two like crazy. We missed you too. Grandma Betty smiled at them. They were angels, as always. Samara looked at the girls and frowned. Are they always dressed identically? Abby smiled at Samara. We like to look just alike, Aunt Sammy. It's fun. Samara sighed. She was certain it was fun for them, but how was she ever going to learn to tell them apart? We may have to get you matching outfits that have different colored collars or something. I'll think on that. Henry looked at Samara with a grin. He'd been able to tell the twins apart since they were tiny, but he understood immediately what was going on in her head. They did need to make it easy for her until she learned to tell them apart. Maybe we should take a quick trip into Walmart to do that. Samara shook her head. Nah. I'll order from Amazon. I have Prime, so we'll have everything here in 2 days. I'll figure something out in the meantime. She could buy several outfits and have Abby always in blue and Avi always in violet. That way she could remember what color they wore by the second letter in their names. Thanks a lot for watching them extra hours for me this weekend, Betty, Henry said. You and Samara need to talk about what hours you'll have them during the week now. She'll be working from home, so I'm sure it won't be as many as it has been. And there it is. That's why I'm here. My work will still need to be done on East Coast time. I'll start work around 8 in the morning and be done by 4. I won't need a lunch break. I can walk them over at 7:45 every morning and pick them up at 4:15. That'll give me time before and after to get everything in order. She'd feel like she was working less hours this way, but really it would be the same. There just wouldn't be an hour commute on the subway or a break for lunch. That sounds good. If you ever need to work late, just let me know. It would be my pleasure to keep the girls any time. Thank you. Samara told her. I guess I'll see you in the morning with the girls. I'll look forward to it. They left, going back to the house. What do you girls think we should have for supper? She asked. For supper? One of them asked. I want pizza. Henry laughed. You always want pizza, Avi. I want tacos. Abby said. And you always want tacos. Maybe Aunt Sammy can make something new that we'll all like. Samara smiled. Maybe I can. As soon as they got home, Samara looked at Henry, taking one of the girls from him. This one is Avi, right? He nodded. Yeah, I've still got Abby. Samara carried Avi up the stairs and into her bedroom. I think we should put some nail polish on you. Would you like that? She rarely painted her nails, but a friend had given her a bunch of polish for her last birthday, so she had a lot of colors to choose from. Avi nodded. My mommy used to polish my nails. Well, we can polish them any time you'd like. How about purple? Purple is a nice color. I think so too. Samara went to her suitcase and dug through her nail polish, finding a purple quickly. She couldn't continually mess up on which girl was which. She was afraid she'd lose their respect quickly if that happened. 10 minutes later, Avi ran down the stairs, showing off her pretty purple nail polish. Samara wasn't surprised when Abby came into the room, holding out her hands. She hurried into the bathroom and came back with blue polish. This will match your eyes. Abby looked at the polish, seeming to consider it for a moment. I like it. Once she'd polished Abby's fingers, she was sure she could tell them apart for a while. Thank God. Asterisk. They had a movie night that evening, watching Samara's favorite children's movie, Beauty and the Beast. I'm going to marry Beast someday, she told the girls in a whisper. But you're married to Uncle Henry. Avi protested. Oh yeah. I forgot. Samara said with a wink toward Henry. I can be a beast if you need me to, Samara. I can keep you from reading and yell at you a lot. Try it. The girls giggled. Uncle Henry never yells, Abby announced. He's too nice. Oh really? That's just 'cause I haven't been around yet. I bet I can make him yell a lot. You can? How? Are you going to try to make him mad? Avi asked. Samara shook her head. No, I have a feeling that it's just something I'm going to be really good at. Why? Abby asked. Samara thought really hard about the question. Because we're married, and we don't know each other very well yet. As we get to know each other, we'll have some troubles. Avi shook her head. Not with Uncle Henry. He doesn't yell. Samara leaned down and kissed the little girl on the forehead. We'll see. We will? Abby asked. Or we'll all hear at least. Samara grinned. The movie had just finished, and she looked at the clock. It's time for baths. Baths? Abby asked. Uncle Henry makes us take baths on Tuesdays and Saturdays. What day is it? Samara sighed. Well, it's not Tuesday or Saturday, but I think little girls should take baths every day. Every day? Avi asked. Our skin will dry up and fall off. That's why we only take them 2 days. Mama made us take them every day too, but Uncle Henry said he got us just in time to save our skin. Samara looked at Henry. Really? Looking back at the sweet girls, she said, bathing every day does not make your skin fall off. I'll only wash your hair on Saturdays and Tuesdays, but you need to bathe every day. I think your uncle just didn't want to have to give you baths every day. Abby looked at Henry, her eyes wide. Did you lie to us, Uncle Henry? Henry looked embarrassed. Well, now I wouldn't call it a lie. It was just a different version of truth. Avi shook her head at Henry. You did lie to us. How can we ever trust you again? I'm so disappointed. Avi got down off the couch and took Samara's hand. Can we take a bath together in Uncle Henry's big bathtub, please? Samara nodded. Of course, you can. Do you want bubble bath? Abby squealed excitedly. Bubbles. She ran for the stairs, Avi at her heels. As soon as the girls were out of earshot, Samara rolled her eyes at Henry. Their skin would fall off if they bathed every day? Really? I'd have told them I lied before they were old enough to start stinking. That doesn't make it any better. Unbelievable. She hurried up the stairs to find the girl sitting on the floor in her bathroom, totally naked. She started the water. Did you get a bath last night? The twins nodded in unison. Yes, ma'am. Anytime we have to stay the night, Grandma Betty gives us a bath, Avi answered. Did she start watching you when you moved in with your uncle? Or did you know her before? Samara added bubble bath to the tub while the water ran. Abby shrugged. We've always known her. Since we were teeny tiny babies. She knew our mommy. Okay, I'm glad you've always known her. She seems to really love you girls. Avi nodded. Of course, she does. We're lovable. Samara laughed. You sure are. She picked up Avi and put her in the tub and then Abby. Do you have boats? She asked, looking around the bathroom for toys. They shook their heads. No boats at all. We used to, but Uncle Henry threw them all in the garbage, Avi said. He did? Samara frowned. Rubber duckies? We don't have any bath toys at all. It's so hard to have fun in the tub without them. We used to have a little orange fish that squirted water out its mouth. I liked to squirt it at Avi. That does sound like a lot of fun. Samara told them. Why was Henry against bath toys? The girls would have more fun in the tub with toys. She gave them each a washcloth. Scrub your sister's back for me. She moved over and put the seat down on the potty, picking up her Kindle from where she'd set it on the counter. The girls would be fine while she read. She made it through exactly 1 chapter before the cries of Aunt Sammy started. When she looked up, she saw that the girls had managed to empty the bathtub of water, but not down the drain. Instead, the water and bubbles were all over the floor. Wait in the tub while I clean up the mess, she said calmly. She got out a towel and threw it on the floor, skating around on the mess, soaking it up as best she could. Let us help, Abby said, standing in the tub watching. No, you sit down. Let me get this cleaned up, and then I'll get you both out. I don't want you falling on the slippery floor. Samara grabbed another towel, hanging the dripping one off the side of the tub. 4 towels later, the floor was dry enough to get the twins out. She dried them quickly and took them through the halls naked to put their clothes on. She'd need to remember to take their clothes with her into the bathroom. It wasn't brain surgery. She'd just never had 2 children to raise before. Once the twins were dried and in their pajamas, she tucked them in. Wait, Abby said. You told us you'd read stories. Samara stopped at the doorway. You like stories? They both nodded. Okay, then let's all meet on Abby's bed and we'll read. When Abby moved to the bed Abby was in, Samara got confused. She looked back and forth between them. Did I get your names confused? She asked. No, Abby responded. Well, then why did Abby get in your bed? Abby grinned. You put us in the wrong beds. Samara sighed. Of course, I did. Let me find a good book. She walked to their bookshelf and picked out 2 books, both by Dr. Seuss. She was a huge Dr. Seuss fan. She moved to sit between the girls and opened up Green Eggs and Ham. The girls were great listeners, taking turns flipping to the next page for her. They loved Green Eggs and Ham and giggled hysterically through Hop on Pop. When she closed Hop on Pop, she kissed each girl on the forehead. Get back in your beds, and under your covers, and I'll tuck you in again. Can we have more stories tomorrow? Avie asked after they'd complied, and Samara was tucking her into sleep. Absolutely. Tomorrow night, I'll let each of you pick out one story. Abby smiled, hugging Samara when it was her turn to be tucked. I love reading stories. You're going to be the best aunt ever. Samara laughed. I'll certainly try to be. She left the room, shutting off the light, and immediately went to her office. She powered up her computer and ordered each of the girls 10 shirts that were identical with small differences. There. She wouldn't have a hard time telling them apart now. While she was there, she also ordered several bath toys for them. She was a strong believer in good bath toys. Yes, that was the answer. Since wearing her sexy nightgown hadn't really worked on Henry the night before, she went to bed in her usual panties and a t-shirt. When she walked into the room where Henry was already in bed, he closed his eyes. Are you trying to kill me? Of course not. I just want you to think of me as attractive. She moved to the center of the bed, pressing as close to him as possible. You do think I'm attractive, don't you, Henry? I think you're trying to kill me, he said, rolling to his side so his back was to her. Samara didn't take a moment to think. Instead, she pressed up against his back, her breasts against him and her knees tucked behind his. She rested her cheek on his back with a smile. I think you're pretty sexy, Henry Crider. He groaned. Stop saying things like that to me. Oh, I couldn't. I would never lie to you. I won't even tell you your skin will fall off if you bathe too much. Am I ever going to live that down? Never.